Africa is currently battling the invasion of the African armyworm that has hit East Africa and some parts of Central Africa, destroying crops in vast farmlands and only leaving farmers counting losses. Governments are doing all they can to contain the spread to the rest of the continent. To get a better understanding of this challenge that has hit Africa, we had a conversation with Ruth, an entomologist and a PhD student studying armyworm control at Lancaster Environmental Centre.
Jambil, my name is Ruth Carter and I'm a PhD student at Lancaster University and Rothamsted Research Centre in the UK. And I'm an entomologist, so I've been studying insects all my life. And I work on Visari Jetty at the moment, so armyworms are my main focus.
Talking about the armyworms, African armyworms has so much hit us, and the challenge of the armyworms has hit us so much, and the continent is in dire need for help and support where possible. So we want to understand exactly what is this armyworm. Briefly, give us a word about the African armyworm pests that we are registering in Africa, especially. So many African countries have been hit: Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and so many others in the Western Africa. Kindly give us a brief of the African armyworm. Thank you.
Yeah, so the African armyworm is native to Africa. So it's one of the armyworms, one of the Ruth, the armyworms of the Spodoptera, so Spodoptera exempta, that's native to Africa, and there's a big outbreak recently, and it started in Tanzania and Zimbabwe, and there's now spread to Uganda and Kenya as well. And it's causing widespread devastation. It's absolutely devastating.
Thanks for that brief. So, Africa, now we are seeing such a challenge coming in, and approach is something we need to learn as Africa. What do you think are the remedies that we need to put in place to avert this challenge here?
I think you need a good monitoring system. So forecasting is vitally important. So like pheromone helpful, because if you control the caterpillars when they're small, that's usually best to spray them when they're small. When they get too big, you can probably handpick them off the plants, probably most effective, sadly, because that's a lot of labour intensive. You can also use neem, encourage ants, and look at biopesticides as well. Our lab works on biopesticide options, including bacterioviruses.
Do you think pesticides are so effective for the control of the armyworm?
I think pesticides have their problems. They're particularly expensive, and it's best to use them when the caterpillars are small, which can often be really, really difficult to spot them at that point. You're spraying with them.
So, there are assertions that the pesticides are harmful to human health. How best can we apply them without actually bringing the negative effects on the human health?
Yeah, so make sure that you're wearing protective clothing when you're spraying. So wearing the proper masks and gloves, and following the recommendations on the back of the bottle, and that you're using proper registered approved pesticides.
So Spodoptera exempta is what we're having right now in Uganda and most parts of the East African region. What other types are there for the African armyworms? And is the gravity of the damage caused by each the same, or the damage is varied?
That's a really interesting question. So there's many different types of Vibari Jeshi. So the armyworms, including some Spodoptera species and some non-Spodoptera species. In terms of the Spodoptera species, you've got the African armyworm that's, as you mentioned, is native to Africa and is now causing major outbreaks in Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania. But you've also got the fall armyworm as well that you may have heard of. So the fall armyworm arrived from the Americas in 2016 into Africa and has now unfortunately spread throughout most of Africa. One of the main problems that I'm seeing, at least on Twitter, is with identification of the two species. So they are quite difficult to identify. So the most easiest way to identify them is probably the fall armyworm has like 4 black spots on the back that are arranged in a square. So on the back of the caterpillars. And you usually find them in the plant, so in like the middle of the maize funnel. Whereas the African armyworm you find often in groups, and they're black, often in colour, and they usually have a black head as well. But they're usually on the larvae, and they're usually on the leaves, and you can find them everywhere. They're more like plagues. Yes, talking to the farmers in Tanzania, they suggested that the African armyworm is probably more damaging than the fall armyworm, because the plant can often cope with the damage from the fall armyworm. Whereas the African armyworm, the leaves are just gone and it's just bare stalks, and even the stalks are eaten as well. It's more like plagues, like the caterpillar version of locusts. Absolutely devastating damage.
Right, thank you so much. Any adaptive measures that we can take on just in case we need to adapt to, because these are things that may not go away so soon. So how best can we adapt to such challenges when we get them over and over?
So I think maybe planting other crops as well as, so the African armyworm only feeds on grasses, so that's sugarcane, millet, rice, maize, and other things, and sorghum in particular as well. So perhaps if you plant other crops like ground nuts and the beans and other crops, then that might help as well. And if you're replanting your field after an attack from the African armyworm, then perhaps not planting maize again might be a good way to adapt.
Right, thank you so much, Ruth, for your time.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you accepting our invitation to discuss African armyworm.
Thank you, it's been really interesting.
Yes, that's all we had for now.
Asante sana.
Karibuni.